right. Well, welcome to the Robo Show. I'm on today with Colonel Todd, Riddle, which is like a kind of like a tongue twisting riddle to say that. Yeah. So, if you guys don't know who Todd is, he's a amazing military veteran who is he started off in the 82nd Airborne as a parachutist and decided to stop jumping out of planes and start flying them, and flew A-10s, which is my favorite platform as a ground guy. Like, there's nothing more rewarding than seeing an A-10 come over to the crest of a hill and bringing down that 30 millimeter cannon onto the enemy. So he wrote an amazing book we can talk about today called Faith, Family, and Fighter Jets. He's a brother in faith and believes in some of the same principles as I do with spiritual resiliency. So I'm excited to talk to him about some of those things. So welcome on, Todd.
Hey, great, Chad. It's great to be here. I've enjoyed watching your ministry and the outreach you guys have had, and you've had an incredible year. And, you and I had crossed paths a number of years ago and then heard you on Focus on the Family talking about your withdrawal from Afghanistan and how you guys had got in to get some people out. And I tell you, I'm flying a desk currently at the Pentagon, and there couldn't be a more painful thing than to sit there and hear you guys doing this stuff. And man, my blood's pumping. And I called Will and said, if you need someone to fly, I'm available. And then shortly thereafter, we're seeing you on Fox News. And then my daughter's a student at Liberty and was there when you were a guest. And then just this week, I heard you on Focus on the Family for you and your wife talking about God's truly restorative grace, the miracle of salvation, bringing healing for that. And so to you and your team there, I appreciate what you're doing. You're doing it at a very high level and reaching areas that, man, God has certainly prepared you for this season. And thanks for having the courage to step up and do amazing things, man. That's awesome.
I appreciate that. And like you said, God our really burns our heart to do things, but most importantly, he equips us even in times we don't know. For years later, maybe, and then he orchestrates the events by bringing, if you're obedient to his calling, then he brings in all the right people and all the right resources, and that's what I've really seen and learned most in this last year with Afghanistan and Ukraine is just God's amazing ability to orchestrate things that are far beyond our capacity. I mean, if Mighty Oaks wasn't a big enough example of that for me this last year, Afghanistan and getting those 17,000 people, being in Ukraine right now, it's just continually seeing that. Mm-hmm. Todd, can you really? You had such an amazing military career. I want our listeners to know about you, where you started all the way back when you were a young paratrooper to to flying A-10s to doing 5 combat deployments and now being in the Pentagon. If you could give just kind of a bit of a highlights of your story.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, again, thanks for the chance to be here today. So I grew up in Nebraska and loved sports, and Top Gun came out when I was in 7th grade. And that was my first exposure to seeing fighter jets. And, I'm not a normal sized human adult. I'm a little guy, and I knew I wasn't going to play for the Dallas Cowboys. And this seemed like the closest thing I could get to serving my country and being a pro athlete was flying jets. And so my journey wasn't a straight line by any means. I had started at the academy and had a number of shoulder reconstructs and, trying to play grown-up sports, and this little body didn't work so well. And then had bounced back to a little school in Springfield, Missouri, Evangel University, and graduated from there and worked as a youth pastor for a number of years while my wife finished her undergrad. And while I was a youth pastor and speaking there a little bit, got commissioned in 1998 and was off to pilot training. And I headed to Shepherd Air Force Base, Texas, and was flying there, and then was assigned the A-10. And then during my first assignment as a hog guy at Pope Air Force Base, my additional duty was to jump with the 82nd Airborne, the first of the 325th, and was there over 9/11. And that changed all of our lives and has marked the last 20 years of my career. And so I had some little ones and flew hogs there for a time, back to Texas as an instructor, and then flew A-10s out of Whiteman Air Force Base for 12 years. I was a fighter squadron commander there. Went and did a SecDef fellowship at Qualcomm, Mobile Technologies there in Carlsbad, near where you spent quite a bit of time at Pendleton speaking. And now I'm flying a desk in a sub-basement B of the Pentagon with a red stapler and hoping to go back to a jet about a year from now, maybe. So thanks.
uh, everybody from my world is always intrigued about the A-10. And from what I've talked to, I have a couple of friends that are A-10 pilots, and they all say you're essentially straddling a giant cannon with wings. And
Absolutely.
it's just the whole thing is just a giant gun, right?
It truly is. It's an incredible machine. It's an incredible machine. So there's not only things that I love about the airframe, but the mission. And then so unique to the airframe, right? It was never a loved child of the U.S. Air Force, but the Army and Marines have loved it, and that's kind of a unique character trait and culture for us. There's always the thump your chest fighter pilots, who consider themselves the tip of the spear, and we can stand up and do that, with the best of them. But the reality is, our culture knows that our mission, as we like to say, is that 18-year-old kid with a rifle. And I will bend that jet up to get down in there to help guys like you that are on the ground when the bad guys are right across the street. And so that culture just permeates through who we are and then through the airframe. And yeah, that GAU-8 30 millimeter gun, let's see, there's a little bullet back here for anybody watching your podcast today. That's a single bullet about the size of a Coke bottle. It'll shoot 70 a second. And if you take the gun out of the jet, I mean, it's bigger than a Volkswagen Bug. And it is uniquely capable of doing the mission it was designed for, man. It's incredible.
What's the the cyclic rate, 70 rounds per second? How many rounds are on that airframe that you carry in a combat load?
Yeah, so we'll hold 1,170 rounds. And as it spins up, it'll spin up with a little occipital throw, and then tighten up its dispersion there about a half second into its burst. We'll shoot 250 to 400 rounds on a combat burst, depending on the target. And you've got your training rounds. Those in and of themselves can pierce 2 inches of armor. Then your API and HEI rounds as well. So I tell you what, the post 9/11 world really tied the hog to special operators like yourself. And I don't know that we ever crossed paths, but the last dozen years of my career, I was tied pretty close to JSOC and Jaded Thunder exercises where, man, that was really compelling. I'm not a tier 1 asset by any means, but working with that kind of community really yanks you out of any sort of complacency. I mean, it's one of those things that even at 40 years old, I want to get better at this jet. I want to get better at who I am as a fighter pilot. And that's really compelling, man. And I was honored to be a part of that for a long time.
I can tell you from being a ground guy, it's probably the favorite airframe for us to call in. I think one is because obviously you have tons of different capacities of different aircrafts. You call in JDAMs but it's just something that I think the ground guys appreciate about the A-10 pilots that are willing to get down in there and get right on top of the guys and there's the physiological response when you're on the ground. You hear that cannon roaring off.
Yeah, they call it the Dragon or the Monster. We would pick up human intel and intercepted radio comms, and the Taliban would call it the Monster or the Dragon, and so we would get patches that said the same. And it was neat to be overhead your type of teams. We would want to be another team member just above you, where if we're above a certain altitude, there's no noise signature. We're able to track you on the pod and really intimately kind of be involved in what's going on there. So some unique capes that were able to get us in there. Laser rocket, as we're talking about capabilities, was an incredible asset that we've added. And the low collateral damage and kinetic energy coming off of that weapon was incredible.
Yeah, I got a casing right here from.
There you are. Absolutely.
from my buddy Daryl's, who's a colonel too, but yeah, you may know him. I'll get his last name. I know him well, but I don't know his last name. But
that's all right.
But yeah, it's thinking of this, 70 of these per second in a 250 round burst. One of the things he said is you can actually feel the aircraft almost like physically slow down when you hit that burst.
Well, I've never felt it slow down, but you can certainly have that the dash rumbles, and it'll black out it'll flash out your NVGs. You'll get a blinding flash there. Hopefully that brass still smells like your cordite a little bit. That's good for your blood.
Well, so in five combat deployments and all your experience, what's your faith journey? Where faith? I mean, obviously, from your story, you started off as a youth pastor early, but that there even people that come from childhoods of faith, the people that haven't. Uh, there seems to be an intersecting line of people's lives where faith has an intersection with being a warrior, seeing things and doing things that you have to do in the battlefield. Uh, where'd that happen for you?
Sure. Absolutely, and that's a great question. A lot of people want to know that. How are you a Christian? Yet you spend a good portion of your life becoming, proficient at killing people, and that's an unvarnished way to state it. And so, how do those things intersect for me? Well, it's interesting. Growing up as a preacher's kid, I felt like I had good theological underpinnings of what stuff meant. But the reality is to find my own individual calling and individual walk with the Lord, and what were things that compelled my heart. And the idea of competition and doing something noble. We've got U.S. flags and little Captain Americas behind us, and kind of that idea that I am here to be second. And that's a phrase that you've heard. But I don't have gifts and talents. I'm a pretty average individual, but those things that I do have, I understand that they're not simply entrusted in me to make my life comfortable. They are here for me to benefit the lives of others, to nobly run toward the sound of the guns and to be used in that way. And I think that's true of any vocation, whether you're a stay-at-home mom or a school teacher or a janitor, there's something noble about working as unto the Lord. And so even though I started as a youth pastor, and the joke I might like to make is that realized I was probably better at killing people than saving them, and maybe I would make a shift to a different job there. That sounds a little crass, but the reality is it felt very much like kind of a fulfillment of the things that the Lord had put in my heart. And whether my role is to serve my nation as an agent of the country, as a fighter pilot, or as a Christian brother to friends in a fighter squadron, how am I a tent maker, and how's that any different than anyone else that's walking in their faith, realizing, it's truly not about me or success.
Yeah, I can relate to a lot of what you're saying. But for me, unfortunately, my path was falling on my face before I turned to God and able to reconcile my own life, and then realizing, how that mirrored so many other people that I've seen along the way or was observing struggle both while still serving and post service, and really put a compulsion on my heart to share what I had discovered through biblical living with others. And it's taken me on this pretty wild journey for the last 12 years. I've got to do spiritual resiliency training at Mighty Oaks. Not just, we talk a lot about the recovery training from when we talk about Mighty Oaks, the legacy programs, but I get to go in the front end of places like Marine Corps Boot Camp, and I've spoken to over 300,000 active duty troops. And then now, I just got back like 3 days ago from Ukraine, and we spent 2 weeks in Ukraine, but about 6 days in Russian occupied red zones, working with 6 different units and doing spiritual resiliency training. And I always wonder how people can respond to it, especially, young, like tough war fighters who don't have time, feel like they don't have time for God, or to hear don't want to listen to their chaplain, to hear from another war fighter like about faith and about that pillar of resiliency. And every time I'm intimidated what the response is going to be, it always shocks me. It shouldn't anymore, but it does. It shocks me how receptive people are because of that emptiness in our soul that says, hey, we can't do this. We can't do these difficult things in the battlefields of Ukraine or the battlefields of life without God. And our soul knows that. And when we hear it, it resonates whether people are believers or not. And so I'm just coming back. We're like right off this right now. And knowing that you and I share that heart for spiritual resiliency and I'd say our warriors in America, but right now for warriors that are fighting for good and fighting for the way of life, those like those in Ukraine. And it's amazing to see the difference it makes. We just spent a couple of days talking to these guys, and they're fighting for their homes and their families and their countries being invaded by a world superpower that's shooting, ballistic missiles into their neighborhoods, and not just military targets. And they're, they don't know if they're going to live through the day. They don't know what's going to happen to their country and their wives and children. And, but then you see them respond to, from the civilian side, you see them respond to worship. They lost everything, responding worship to God. And you see the military guys, we talk about God, and they're so interested and they're so hungry for that hope and that resilience and that strength that comes through a life of faith, that it was, again, shocking to me how well they resonated to it.
Absolutely. And I think what you're talking about there, Chad, is beginning to understand, right? God has placed eternity in the hearts of man, whether they're able to recognize, Christ being the author of that or not. But all of us at some point, when we go to the why, right? You can have success, but at some point there needs to be a why. Where do I go with suffering? Where do I go with redemption? What do I do when the world is both beautiful and broken? And what do I do with the broken part of that? How do I make sense of that? It is inherently a spiritual question. It's not a question of proficiency, or my tactical prowess. It's a question of, Lord, what are you doing in this broken place? And how, even in the midst of that brokenness, are you sovereign? And people need that sense of meaning. And where do I go for forgiveness and a way forward in the midst of those things? Because the world doesn't have answers that provide an eternal sense of purpose to those things. Yeah, and I think you're drawing that out, whether they understand, hey, that this is drawing me on a path of faith. But those are questions that are speaking, I think, to the universal truths in their heart.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I tried both, so I have a good contrast. I tried to do life and combat, Afghanistan with and without God in my life. And, the without was a hole inside of me that was just filled with everything ugly, hate and rage and anger, bitterness, and, real just darkness kind of came over me. And the end result of that, as I think it's obvious, is not going to end well. The end result for that for me was, anxiety, depression, hopelessness, desire not to even want to live anymore, and becoming suicidal and almost losing my family. And so when I get to go in front of young warriors now and talk to them, like the ones at Marine Corps boot camp, like at the Yellow Ribbon event where you and I both got the chance to speak at, like in Ukraine, I get to tell them that contrast of with and without, and say, one of the things I was saying, what I was saying to these young warriors in Ukraine, because it's a different environment than we have. Like, we've had the Twin Towers attacked, but we never had our country invaded. We never been fighting on our own soil for our lives, for our freedom, for our families. And so, one of the things I go right away is say, I can't relate to this. No one's ever invaded my country. I remember how angry I was when those planes flew in the World Trade Center building, but we went after them in their country. We didn't have to fight on our own. So I can't relate, but I have experienced war. I have experienced loss. I have experienced hardship. And one thing I know is that there's a time, and Solomon talks about this in the Bible, there's a time for war and there's a time for healing. And oftentimes at Mighty Oaks, we're talking to the guys in their legacy program in that time for healing. But there's a time to talk to these guys in a time of war. And so when I'm talking to them right now, it's really like, hey, this isn't a healing time. This is a time for war. Mm-hmm. It's a time for you to be violent and to kill other humans that are trying to take away your God-given rights, freedom, and safety. And this is the land. God owns the land, land, and He's gifted this to the Ukrainian people. That's their land, and it's being taken from them, so they have the right to defend it. So this is a time to fight and a time for war. But in that time, you need to be leaning on God more than ever, because this isn't something to deal with after. And I think oftentimes people in the military, and I relate this to myself, are like, I can do that later. Like, I need to fight now and be violent now and be a warrior now, but I could do the spiritual piece later when I'm older on the recovery end. And that's such a backwards thinking and costs a warrior so much. And that's why I almost ended up where I ended up, to think that you deal with it later. And I love our legacy program. I love that we're able to heal people in the back end. But what's more beneficial is to heal to deal with it on the front end. You can be a warrior you could be, Force Recon Marine or a Navy SEAL or a A-10 pilot, like raining 250 round burst in a truck full of Taliban. Like you could do those things and still be aligned with Christ. And I think it's very important for military warriors to understand that. I think it's very important for people in life to understand that we could do difficult and hard things in life while we walk on Christ, and there's not a need for separation. But the enemy, the spiritual enemy, the devil, will make us think that we can't do those things at the same time.
Sure.
Want to see if you had some comment on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Great insights. And I think one of the things that we carry forward from the military experience is this idea of compartmentalization, right? That faith might be something that I just kind of keep over here and I access on occasion when it's socially acceptable or it might please me. And the war piece is this bigger piece. My military commitment is this container, and then there's a relationship container. And I think for us to truly be spiritual resilient, and I've learned this through my own brokenheartedness, and through our own career, realizing that success can seem arbitrary, and the ambiguity of life. There isn't a straight line of do this and this is what turns out. That broken things happen. But spiritual resilience, I think, at the core is understanding that my work, my relationships, my professional goals, all of those things are emanating from the same point. Rather than spirituality be contained over here and separate, that everything else is an outgrowth of those. The reason I want to be a good officer and a good fighter pilot is so that I can honor the Lord. The reason I want to apologize to my wife or my kids is so that my character might change and I might become more like Christ. Not to kind of run around to different rooms of my life and straighten and tidy up, but to say that the core and center of who I am is rooted in faith and growth, right? I'm broken, I'm sinful, I have value, I am made in God's image, and He has a process of refinement for me. And if I start from, hey, all of these things are refinement so that they become more like Christ, so that I'm honoring Him, so that my excellence in what I pursue might be a reflection of Him. That's a very different thing than thinking, I can leave spirituality kind of at the end, and maybe, it's an add-on, like a piece of equipment that you Velcro to your vest, and then I take it off when it's too heavy. Rather than that, it's core to each subsequent decision I make.
Yeah. There's a lot of things that we teach in the military and learn in the military that are cliche and kind of cheesy, especially when it comes when they were on a PowerPoint slide. But the one thing I think the military's got right is these 4 pillars of resiliency. Or I think the Air Force has added another one. I think it's become competitive now. Every time it was 3 pillars, and now hey, well, we have 4. We have 5.
Yeah.
We have 20 pillars of resiliency. But the mind, body, spirit, and social, like being mentally tough, being physically tough. Those are given. Like if you're going to be in the military and be successful, you need to be mentally tough. You need to be motivated, know your job well. You need to be physically capable of doing your job well. Socially, you need to be surrounded by the right people, right? You can't pick who you're going to work with, but you can pick who you let influence you and speak in your life. But that spiritual pillar is the one that we, tend to overlook. And when I speak at the Yellow Ribbon event, I always kind of use the analogy of a 4-legged stool, where each leg of that stool represents one of those pillars of resiliency. And they're all there, but if one of them's weak, it'll hold that stool up. But as soon as you put weight on it, it comes crashing down. And I think that's in most people's lives, unfortunately, most people in the military's lives, that pillar that seems to be consistently the weak one. And that leg of that stool that's consistently a weak one is the spiritual one. And when we put the weight of life, put the weight of combat on it, or, if you're not in the military and listening, just the weight of life on it, it comes crashing down and you end up on your butt. And this is, I think it's extremely important early on to be honest about where you are in your life and do a self-inventory regularly to say, hey, am I where I need to be in all 4 of these pillars? And if not, then I intentionally, strengthen those pillars. And this is what we're, like right now, like I said, just coming back from Ukraine talking about. And for us, we bring in resources there. The chaplains, where we send these audible Bible sticks in Ukrainian to them, a little bitty, about the size of a AA battery, just in cases the AA battery. And then they have like a little miniature drive inside that they can listen to the Bible and Ukrainian. And the chaplain said we sent them boxes and no one took them. And so our guys go there and we share our stories, our testimonies from the combat veterans who have been through, the hard things we've been through. And we ran out. We needed more.
Yeah.
Over 1,000 of them
Right.
we gave out in the last
Sure.
2 weeks. So I think one of the greatest components in the Bible teaches us to be able to bring spiritual resiliency to others around us, whether you're in the military or just sharing it in life, is through our personal testimonies, through the stories of our life, through stories of our not just successes in life, but our struggles in life and the redemption in
Absolutely.
life. And Revelations talks about this when he talks about this plan that Satan has to be to take over the world, to destroy the world, and God has a plan too. And that plan that God has is a simple one: is through the blood of the Lamb, which is the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, and through the power of our testimony and sharing our stories, sharing our hardships with others is the greatest way that I found to be able to help spread spiritual resiliency with those around us. And I know that's your book is one of the ways that you're attempting to do that through your book. And so I wanted to give an opportunity to share about your book. What's the basis of it, and how's it help strengthen others?
Thanks. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, the book is out and available for pre-orders. And Faith, Family, and Fighter Jets is the title. And I think you've given a great kind of intro to that. And whether a military background or corporate or a parent or a stay-at-home mom, those pillars that we've talked about, the physical, emotional, social, and spiritual pillar of resiliency, we are all able to have kind of an internal cross-check. What's my health on these things? Not that all of those are equal in my amount of time or attention, but that they complement one another. And I think the core of spiritual resiliency, and this is one way that the Department of Defense has truly grown in their understanding of resiliency, is to say there needs to be room here for spiritual resilience. And we're not going to edict to you as a trooper what that means. You get to choose that. But to find your sense of purpose and meaning, and maybe that's your core values. For me, that's my Christian faith. But you need some sort of a thread that's bringing coherence to all of these things. It's bringing purpose to where I'm at physically or emotionally or where I need to grow. And so the book that I've written, we were just telling stories about flying jets or being a youth sports coach to say, here are occasions that, like Chad, where I can say, I have failed quite miserably. Why don't you laugh at it with me? And then see what is Christ teaching us about our growth and our journey to become more like him. And so we've tried to present that in a way that's not just topical, but looking at current, social research and what's unique to our dynamics and organizational excellence, and then saying, all right, how does this really work? How do I take the truths of Scripture and how do I take what science is telling us and say, here's a great way to try and lead teams and find the right place for someone. Or here's a way that I can look at my own health and say, Lord, where might you reach in and tune me up a little bit? And again, for those that, you don't follow a Christian faith, but you're looking for a sense of spiritual purpose, we'll start that journey with wherever you're at and say that there are things that can be refined out of my life. And that's the kind of the journey that I want to walk on people with.
Yeah. So Faith, Family, and Fighter Jets, you can get it online, Amazon, probably any of the book retail outlets that do pre-orders. And outside of the book, what are some things you're doing outside the I know you did Yellow Ribbon. What are some things you're doing outside the military right now?
Yeah, I'm doing a little bit of stuff with artificial intelligence, some chip development things, a couple of conversations with a company out in California. I was fortunate to just be exposed to some of those things. But I think the name Lee Ellis in Leading with Honor. I've partnered with him just a little bit to kind of learn how do we drive impact into other people's lives and what does that look like? And to be, again, bring meaning and coherence to the work that we do. And I think that's challenging for me. All of us need something that's just a little bit different, that makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
The whole let's do hard stuff. So to step up in front of an audience of 1,500 at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning when they'd rather be in bed, that's going to put you in an uncomfortable place. Yeah. And it has nothing to do with flying fighter jets. I need to now find a way to say, what type of message can reach and speak to their heart that might compel change, that might be somewhat transformative, even in a small way. And so those are some of the things that we're looking at. My wife out here in Virginia is doing a great job leading some the local moms in prayer. That definitely feels like you are on the front lines of some culture wars here, and we're trying to play our role in that honorably.
Yep. Well, last question, and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah.
Always want to know, fighter pilots get the, I guess, get the coolest nicknames, all the way back
Yeah.
from Maverick to Goose, and so you got the Riddler. I got to know where it comes from. Everyone wants to know the story behind those names.
Of course. Well, there's also part of a fighter pilot culture that says you have to tell at least 10% of the truth. Okay. So you can make up whatever sort of outlandish lie and story you want to make up with, as long as it's a 10% truth. So actually, my first given call sign in high school was Riddler, and my last name was Riddle. It just kind of fit. Well, then in my high school years, I got arrested for trespassing with the high school varsity basketball team. We had made the state championship, and it was tradition, right? So we had no choice to toilet paper the school. So we went and had done that, and I was picked up and arrested by a police officer who went to my dad's church. He actually wrote the ticket, and the school play that year was Fiddler on the Roof. And all of my friends from the basketball team went around and marked all of the signs. Instead of Fiddler, it said Riddler on the roof. And so that was kind of the genesis that made that stick a little bit. And then through the Air Force, I've had a couple of different call signs and had borrowed a few signs from Iraq to buy out of one. And that's where we've ended up.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks for what you and your wife are doing. It's awesome to see, great Americans still doing great things for our country and beyond themselves for the cause of others. And so I thank you for that. God, pray God's blessing and favor over the book, not just for success for
Thanks,
you, but that it impacts many lives and families.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, definitely, if you're listening, get a copy. Writing books is difficult. Getting them out is even more difficult. So I always want to, especially fellow veterans, support in these efforts to share our stories. So God bless, Todd. Thanks again. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you, Chad. Wonderful.